Welcome to webinar 4 of the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference. This is a 3-session exclusive with Netflix hit coach John Mosley Jr., Major League Soccer and English Premier League high performance guru Phil Hayward, and our guest for this session, Jon Bartlett from the NBA. In the last 13 years, John has amassed a range of experiences through various research and practitioner roles in high performance sport. Currently, John works for the NBA in New York as performance advisor for all of the NBA academies around the world. John has worked in performance across the globe, firstly in soccer with Liverpool FC and the England national teams, before spending 6 years in Australia with the Western Bulldogs and the Gold Coast Suns. We are very excited to have John join us for today's session, which will be presented by Peter Munt. Peter is partner of RDK Sports International and also a big basketball fan, so he's very excited to ask questions today. Before I hand it over to Pete, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this session is recorded, the Yugambeh people of Southeast Queensland, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Before we begin, I would like to say a huge thank you to our event partners. Firstly, a massive thank you to our major partner, the City of Gold Coast. Your ongoing support of this event and all things sport on the Gold Coast is very much appreciated. We would also like to thank the following event partners for their ongoing support of the Gold Coast Elite Sports Conference, including Gold Coast Super Clinic Physiotherapy, Coomera Anglican College, Oztech Connect, Player Path, Payne Pod, Lynn Hughes Property Group, Sparms, Pummel, and RDK Sports International. So without further ado, I'll now hand it over to Pete, who'll kick off all things NBA with performance advisor, Jon Bartlett.
Harriet, massive thank you. And John, welcome today. We're really excited to dig down and have a really good conversation about everything within the Mba Academy and a little bit obviously about your past and digging through to some of the things you've done. So massive thank you and welcome, John.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks to the guys at RDK Sports for the invitation. Really appreciate it.
No, beautiful. Well, mate, let's probably start by digging down a little bit on your background. I know Harriet's given us a little bit of an insight, but do you want to give us a little bit of a starting point into where your career started in sports?
Yeah, sure. So as everyone can probably tell, I've got a UK accent with a hint of Australian twang in there somewhere. So I started out 16 years ago with my undergrad degree in Liverpool at John Moores University. It's with a focus on football, soccer, but it was predominantly sports science and nature. And then I was lucky actually to go straight on to PhD. Obviously the model now really requires you to go down the master's route first, but I was lucky to go straight to PhD in an area which probably less people in sport have probably worked in. It was very lab based. It was in muscle physiology and nutrition. I was really interested in understanding how we adapt to training, how we can manipulate the signals that coordinate training adaptation, and how we can use nutrition, and particularly carbohydrate restriction, to sort of manipulate those responses. And then during that time, when I was doing my PhD, I was lucky to get an opportunity to start working for Liverpool Football Club with their elite development squad. And here I sort of provided sports science, strength and conditioning, and nutrition support. And I was there for about 18 months, but sort of after about a year in, I was asked to travel with the England national soccer teams. The first camp was to Portugal. It was a 5-day lead-in that I found out that I was asked to go on it. And it was really a rabbit in headlights type moment, really. And it was that sort of traditional generalist specialist type role, and you did everything on the field, off the field, in the weights room, recovery, nutrition, monitoring, everything. And so I spent 3 to 4 years in that role. In 2012, when my PhD came to its conclusion, I was asked to join England full time. So that part-time sort of camp role became full-time, and I was charged with the responsibility and remit of uniforming the sports science strategy for all the England development teams from the under 15s through to the under 20s. And that was probably I guess, one of my biggest learning curves, I think, because it was a bit more strategic, and it wasn't just delivery. It was now going down that path of communication and working with all different clubs, building relationships around the country with all the clubs. A very different role to just being on the field. But one thing obviously I did was my PhD, and so I had a passion for research anyway. And I was really keen to try a new sport, work in a different country, do a bit of travel. And so when a role presented itself in Australia, in Melbourne, it was a 50-50 type split role between research and applied practice. I went for it. And so early 2014, I moved to Melbourne, joined the Western Bulldogs jointly with Victoria University. Spent just under 3 years there. Had a great time, had some great success, and built some really good processes and systems. And then in 2016, moved to the Gold Coast and took up the role as head of sports science and research with the Suns. Spent 3 years there, developed a number of different things and processes, and had a great time. Loved the place, great club to work for. And then brings me here now in New York, where I joined. It'd be nearly a year, so it's a year next month, where I joined the MBA as a performance advisor.
Oh, amazing. And that's a massive journey. I mean, to dig down a little bit, I know you've got a background in research, and I suppose we'll work our way through to there. For you, in working across 3 different continents, different age demographics and so forth, and completely realistically different sports in that science field, is there some basic principles that you implement when looking at these strategies and applying that science in regards to getting the best out of the athletes that you're working with?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess there's some people that stay in one sport and become a real specialist in one sport. There's some who sort of move around sports, and I guess I'm sort of moving down that path somewhat. I think when I was growing up, even when I was at university, even when I was with England, I never envisaged myself working in the AFL. And truth be told, I never saw a game and watched a game before I actually landed in the country. And my first game in AFL was in the coach's box, round 2 in 2014. And so that was an eye-opener, because I had no idea from a tactical game point of view and the rules. But I think from a performance standpoint, there's a lot of principles that run true, no matter what sport you're in. And certainly from a sports science and a strength and conditioning and a sort of a support staff perspective, you essentially just need to understand the demands of the game from a physical standpoint. And that was always one of my sort of first backdrops to go to, a reference point. If I can understand the game in its purest form from a physical standpoint, I can build from there a foundation towards then understanding the game from a technical, tactical. I feel as if I've got some decent interpersonal skills that I can connect with coaches. I can ask questions in the right and frame them in the right way to learn about the actual sport specifically, and then see where I can add value from a physical preparation standpoint. And that's probably what I really sort of build, I guess, my sort of philosophy and principle on is, you can understand the sport in its purest form physically, build those relationships, and it always comes down back to people, and I'm sure we'll get to some of that stuff down the line. Then you can work in most sports. That said, if you're a coach, it's a little bit different, because you coach that sport for a reason. So I'm probably very lucky in the field I'm in that I'm able to sort of transgress to different sports and move around in that way.
Oh, awesome. To get a guide as well, I mean, working in the AFL, if we talk about that for a little bit and going through, when you obviously take a role within those 2 clubs and working through, how do you define the success of your role and going there going, hey, that worked and my principles were successful in what I implemented?
It's a great question, and I've probably battle with myself a lot in terms of how you measure yourself and how you measure success in your particular role. Because at the end of the day, if you measure yourself by win and loss records, 90% of the time you're failing. Because there's only one winner at the end of the day. There's only one team that wins the Premiership. There's only 4 teams that make top 4 and then 8 teams that make finals. And I was probably really lucky in the experience that I got in hindsight, where with the Bulldogs, we finished out of the two out of the 3 years, we finished in the top 8. In the final year, won the flag. And then with the Suns, so at the opposite end of the ladder. And so I really question then what my purpose is at quite a deep level, because you're not judging yourself and your success on win and loss. What you're doing, you're actually trying to unpack about what your purpose is. And I guess a lot of what I do is sort of research led and research informed. And I really sort of lean on the research to inform practice, to impact decision making. And there's a number of different skills that are sort of hidden behind just the research word, so to speak, which I think adds value to that sort of performance measurement. And so things you can think about like reflection, critical thinking, curiosity, love for learning, attention to detail, communication, problem solving. I mean, the list is endless. And so when you now start pulling that apart and then going, okay, I'm a problem solver. And that's how I see myself, to try and solve problems in a different way and see things from a different view and perspective. Yes, it might not impact the scoreboard directly, but informally it has impact on each individual. And so if I can serve others and serve the support needs for each individual coach or in each individual athlete or support staff, then I see myself doing a pretty good role. And again, if it comes back to also what your common goals are as well, organizationally, I mean, everybody wants to win, but there's likely to be something a bit more strategic as well that leans and feeds into that. So that's probably how I really think about sort of measuring success at a personal level.
Yeah, and I suppose to dig down a little bit on that background in research, can you explain a little bit about the research piece and what that means in practice for you as well?
Yeah, sure. Obviously, I've done my PhD. I've got 2 adjunct roles with 2 different universities, and I've been associated with 3 universities in my time so far. And I guess at a pure level, I just love research. I love creating new knowledge. I love translating that knowledge and trying to discern what it means and interpret. And I love applying that to whether it's athletes, whether it's coaches. I love informing decision making. I love impacting performance. And I think if you're doing research, you're at the forefront of your industry because you're creating that new information, that new knowledge. And I've been very lucky to have the roles that I have and the autonomy and the support, I guess, from some of the people I've worked with to do and to carry out the vision that I've had. And I think the role at the Bulldogs really epitomised that model of research and practice. Also, I mentioned before, it was a 50-50 split role between the club and university. And what we were doing from a sports science perspective and integrated into that day-to-day service to the athletes and the coaches, it was feeding a broader performance-focused research agenda that was driven by the club's needs. And I think at one point, we had up to 12 research students from honours through to PhD, all undertaking applied research with the coaching group, with the athletes, with the recruiters, trying to impact every single part of the organisation where we could try and eke out any competitive advantage we could. So that probably really was, I guess, utopia in its sort of research to practice model and some of the stuff that we were doing on a daily basis.
I suppose culminating in a premiership as well is always a nice way to tie off on the practices coming into play as well, which is always good.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more to do with it than the partnership with VU, but I mean, the whole leadership model, and this, you could probably unpack that in a day, a lot longer than that, and a lot more than just an hour Q&A. But there's a lot around people, culture, leadership that probably aligns with some of that success as well.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. In looking at your role now, do you want to give us a bit of an overview within what your role within the Mba Academy is now, and that transition piece?
Yeah, sure. So obviously I've been here just short of a year now, and in my role as a performance advisor, I really help manage all the different performance programs for all the Mba academies around the world. So this includes physical performance, medical provision support, and a program what we call as performance lifestyle. So this is a hybrid of life skills training, performance psych, mental health and well-being, career transition. So there's those three main programs, and then there's, where applicable, I support some of the recruiting and talent ID processes and some of the coach education and development programs as well. So that's, I guess, in a nutshell, what the role is. I can certainly go into a bit more detail about what the Academy program is and means for those who don't particularly know about it.
I reckon that's not a bad idea. Let's dig down into it.
Yeah, cool. So essentially, the Mba Academy program is like the pinnacle of the MBA's global talent ID program. It's around 4 years old, and it's a pyramid type talent ID program. There's a junior MBA, which I think from memory last year, I think reached 108 countries and something like 90 million participants. So it's a huge global program that feeds basketball schools. Basketball schools feeds another program called Basketball Without Borders, which some of you may know a bit about. And then the Basketball Without Borders feeds the Mba Academy program. And then at the very top of that is one of the academies called the Mba Global Academy, which is located in Australia. But essentially, they're full time, they're residential, and all the kids, all the athletes in those academies, they receive their education, basketball, strength and conditioning, lifestyle and character development, medical provision support. There's 6 academies in total. There's one in Mexico, which covers all the Americas, bar the US. There's one in Senegal in Africa, which covers obviously the Africa continent. One in India, 2 in China, and then the one in Australia, as I mentioned before. And so what the purpose and aim of the academies is to really create opportunities in those different regions where those creates don't exist normally, with the ultimate aim of getting them to the US, providing that opportunity to get to the US to college, or sign pro in their own markets or their own regions, and then potentially get to the draft. And then I think just some numbers just to run down this. I think there's 55, like this is current, 55 all-time Division I NCAA commitments, and 2 of which have won that NCAA championship. 22 countries are represented by Academy alumni playing in Division I. There's 8 Academy alumni, which are pros outside of the NBA, so in their own markets, and there's around 120 to 130 current Academy athletes. So it's pretty big. It's moving pretty fast. It's only about 4 years old, nearly 5 years old now, the program, and it's evolving all the time.
And I suppose for you, and touching on that lifestyle program and going through, what's the main focus in regards to it? Is it obviously the education and externally of the sports really, really big? Can we talk a little bit about the education and probably the difficulties that might be across different countries, having different education systems to getting them to college as well?
Yeah, I mean, you've got the cultural traditions and backgrounds, which is a challenge just in itself. But essentially, I guess what we're doing is trying to operate a program which is uniform across the board, across a network, but flexible enough that can be delivered and aligned to the cultural norms and traditions of each region. I mean, that's the broad way of looking at it. But essentially, where we can really sort of coordinate some of those programs consistently across, then it helps as that feeder pathway into the college system. So what the US college system recognizes from an educational standpoint, we try and make it consistent at the academy level as well. It's delivered. So probably a little bit different to what's delivered normal at prep schools, normal schools, but certainly meets the needs of the kids. And we've got a number of education teacher trained staff delivering this education, their academic side of things, and that's really supplemented and complemented by all the other stuff in their program as well.
No, awesome. Obviously, we've said about the purposes. Is there any key successes that you've seen since you've come on board and noticed some trends coming out of the academies at the moment with some of the sports science things you're working at?
I guess probably the two biggest success stories right now currently, which have probably got some pretty good media attention as well, is one of our athletes who was from Cameroon, spent some time in the Africa Academy and the Global Academy, just won the championship, the NCAA championship with Baylor University. And then we've got our first academy player, Josh Giddy from the Global Academy in Australia, who will go to the draft next month. So that'll be our first player who likely sign pro into the NBA. So those are the two recent success stories which have received probably some media attention and probably will continue to get more. And those stories will just continue to evolve with time. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think if there's loads more, and it'd probably take a lot longer than what we have right now to go through them. But essentially, that's the pathway, and those are the two different. Those two things probably epitomize what we're trying to do with the program. Sign pro in your own country, get to the draft, or come to the US, go to college, and then if you're good enough, go to the draft that way.
Does the academies have some basic principles, and maybe talking about some of that in that sports science field in regards to developing younger athletes? I suppose maybe if we touch on some of the ages of the athletes you're working with compared to probably what you were in the past as well, because obviously at the Bulldogs, within the England camp, their grown men is a lot of that age demographic, but obviously being kids and some of the differences in principles that you would have had to implement. Is there a big difference in that?
The first word that comes to mind is no, but then when you unpack that a little bit, it then becomes context dependent. And the reason why I say that is performance is context dependent based on what you think is performance. I mean, performance for us right now is about the development of each individual and seeing that individual maximize potential and follow a trajectory and a timeline and development pathway to get them to where we think they can get to. At a senior or pro level, it's about what we discussed before. It's about obviously winning at the weekend. And obviously that's where some of the sort of the uncertainty and stress comes from at the pro level. But I think when you're in sport, you're always thinking about performance and talking about performance, and it's just the way it's where you define performance and unpack it. I think for us specifically, go to your point about the differences because of the age group. I mean, some of these guys are 7 foot tall at 15 years old, strong as you've ever seen anybody, and so physically, you're going to take them along a pathway and a journey to the end point of the academy to get them ready to make that transition, that next career transition. And that's similar whatever sport you're in at academy level. basketball is obviously traditionally a sport of very big people, and so they do come in between the ages of 14 and 18 already 6.5+ foot, 210 plus centimeters, 100 to 115 kilos for some of them. So they're already, there's not much you can do in terms of making them bigger. You can always make them stronger, but it's about movement competency at the end of the day. Can they move better? Can they move more efficiently? Can they learn how to use their body on a basketball court? And that's where the coaches come in, because now they can help develop that in the players and the athletes to understand how they can use 7 foot and 115 kilos on a basketball court. The other part of it, which we haven't spoken about much, is about the character development and the actual development of the person. And that's where a lot goes into at this age, is just developing that person. No matter where they come from, what their background is, we'll put a support network around them, which will get them to where they need to get to. And all their needs, our aim is to meet all their needs as required at an individual basis. And so there's a huge amount of work that goes into developing the person, not just a basketball potential athlete in the future.
I think that was a question I was going to ask as well. Obviously, since you've probably started, and a lot of that research piece has been around physical attributes and how you can get the body to perform at the highest level. Are you more swinging, are things starting to swing where it's looked at in the mental side of things as well, to help get the best out of the athlete by putting them in the best positions to succeed as well?
I wouldn't say it's swinging more towards that. I think it's just a case of there's more awareness around the importance and role that health or mental health and well-being can play in performance. I mean, you've heard say healthy mind, healthy body, and all those sort of like cliches and stuff. But really, if you're ignoring anything from the shoulders up, and you're only concentrating worrying about the shoulders down, then you're missing a huge component of performance and development. And that doesn't matter how old you are, whether you're 10, whether you're 20, or whether you're 30 or into retirement at 40. Health and well-being, mental health and well-being, is a critical piece. And we certainly have a strong network and a strong program that, I don't want to say wraps the athletes in cotton wool, because that's definitely not what we do, but certainly treats it with the care it needs and the attention it requires to help them develop.
I have had a question come through, which has probably been a little bit of a hot topic recently, which I'd be curious to hear as well. Obviously, Ben Simmons is getting a lot of media attention. Well, he's getting a lot of media attention over here in Australia at the moment. The question basically comes through: if you had Ben Simmons for an hour, what advice would you give him with regards to confidence on his offensive level?
One, I don't know Ben Simmons well enough to comment effectively on that question. So whilst I'm probably deflecting, I definitely am deflecting. I'm not going to hide away from that. I don't know enough about Ben. I don't know the 76ers in any way. So I'm not in a good place to comment on that.
Nah. And within regards to that, I suppose in that performance and working through, you're obviously working on an individual basis with these kids in developing them to get to the highest level. On the flip side of that as well, they're obviously playing as a team, and they're trying to come together as a team. I know in Australia, they compete at the national championships. They did win the national championships here in the under-20s recently as well. How is that a coach's role to help coordinate the coming together, or are you involved in that process?
Yeah, I think obviously traditionally and rightly so, the coach has been absolutely critical to that development of the team. For sure, at our level, at the development level, you're trying to get each individual to their endpoint so they can career transition effectively and to where they need to go to. But at the same time, and this is the art piece, right, of coaching, of developing a cohesive togetherness, strong culture in which those players buy into and work together as a team. It's been often said, I think, in the last few years that certainly at development level that winning's not be all and end all, but if you get it, great. And so there is still a requirement, and that's still one of the intangibles that you still want in these kids when they come in. You want them to be competitive. It's a key trait that you want in professional athletes. But that can't go by the wayside and not sort of contribute to the overall development of the culture and the togetherness and sort of these kids live with each other on a daily basis, right? They're in each other's pockets. They live in dorms. They study together. They train together. They're in the weights room together. They eat together. That only needs one or two characters to sort of unsettle that. So I think a strong culture driven by the coaches, but equally said, when the players run that program and now they start to hold their own teammates to account and have responsibility for their actions. Yeah, and that comes back to really strong culture as well.
Awesome. In looking at some of the obviously cultural differences that you had, as we touched on a little bit earlier, and you've seen obviously different cultural differences at sporting clubs and having to implement that across. What's some of the biggest challenges you faced in implementing the programs into those cultures?
So I think the word culture sometimes can be sort of like bandied around quite easily. And culture, I mean, we have a strong focus on what culture means from a basketball standpoint, and the culture from that typical where you're from type approach as well, right? So the obvious difference there is the language differences between all those different regions that we operate in. But we have people who are multilingual, who can speak the languages, so it doesn't become an issue. And then there's the obvious cultural traditions that originate in those different regions as well. And as I mentioned, I think early on, is one of the goals is to try and uniform and sort of broaden the whole program so there's consistency across the board, but it's flexible enough to align and account for those different cultural traditions. And that's where some stuff like language might come in, or you might typically not be a culture that works on weekends. So the whole schedule is very different in one academy to the other. And so there are those things, but that said, from a sporting point of view, apart from the technical, tactical part, they're all similar, right? You're still working with people from different backgrounds, different education, different experiences, different roles. When you're working in a team, that's everywhere. I mean, it's what a multidisciplinary team is. And I think I've mentioned before, but the difference is the context. It's development versus professional. And whereas we don't have that weekly competition, which dictates the mood at the weekend or on a Monday morning, it's largely consistent wherever you are. I mean, you're still working a performance, and what that means in each region, it's very different for each player. But at the end of the day, performance is performance. It's how you contextualize it.
I suppose, and just to open up to everyone, we've got a couple of questions coming through, but we'd love any more questions to come through as well, as we'd love to make this a bit of an open forum as best as possible. But John, as a question that's kind of just come through, is there anything you learned in Australia and the AFL system that you have implemented and then taken over to the NBA academies?
It's probably more about the development as me as a practitioner and a leader in the field, I would say. I mean, that's still evolving, and it will continue to evolve for as long as I live and work in this industry. But probably one of the biggest things was, I think I mentioned before, but when you're winning, everything's great, and the vibe's great, the environment's great, the banter's great. When you're losing, it's a little bit different, and so that can put challenges and pressures on relationships, on conflict, on conversations, on processes. And so probably one of the biggest things I learned from time in AFL with those two experiences was, what do I actually do and why do I do it? And that's what I challenge anybody working in sports to think about, because you can easily get stuck in that day-to-day. One of the things, one of the ex-players became a coach at Bulldogs, Gia used to call it the grind, embrace the grind. And sport is associated with the grind, but if you can zoom out just for 5 minutes, 10 minutes and think about why you do what you do, that's probably the biggest thing I learned. And that was obviously certainly a personal level, which I've sort of, I guess that's evolved my philosophy and my approach to what I do on a daily basis.
Now, for you working with different clubs and different programs, obviously there's going to be different philosophies from the coach in regards to a science prospect. How have you, I suppose, when walking into a club, have you found challenges where a coach or the academy or something doesn't necessarily agree with what you're saying? How do you work your way through? Is that research-driven improving your point?
That's a great question. It's something I've become highly passionate about. I mean, again, it comes down to people and your ability to build relationships, your ability to connect, and the ability to manage people, manage up, manage down, manage sideways. And for me, in this area, to do with translation and performance impact, and performance delivery, and working with coaches, it's about focusing on what I can do to try and understand them better. So understand their views, understand their perspectives, understand where they're coming from. Why do they have a different view to me? What's their experience? Is that actually a blind spot for me? So what I've suggested is that, have I actually got a blind spot that I've missed something completely? Have I got all the information I need to actually contribute to this conversation and this decision? Because the coach might have a lot more information contextually than me. So I would, that's one thing I try and work towards, is understand where, from a coach's perspective, where they sit and where they sort of have a view. And then if you see it from a different viewpoint, great. And at some point you meet in the middle, and then whatever that decision is, whatever it's best for the program, make that decision. And whether that's about me, whether it's about them or someone else, well, it's actually about the program. So I think when you become sort of that little bit, it doesn't agree, so doesn't buy into science. I think every coach has a little bit of science in them somewhere. It's just trying to understand what their perspective, their background and viewpoint is, to understand why they've got that certain viewpoint.
Yeah. As the questions come through from Ken here, it's when working with someone like a Josh Giddey, how much work and what sort of work do you guys get to do with them due to them being in pro systems already? So I don't think Josh wasn't a part of the academy. He transitioned from the academy to the 36ers, didn't he?
Yeah, so Josh, I think there might be one or two from the academy who probably better placed to talk about Josh specifically, but Josh certainly came through the academy program, and when he was at the academy program, he would have been full-time. Now, whether he was there for a year or 2 years before he joins Adelaide, that would have been a full-time residential delivery program that Josh received in all those different areas that I alluded to before.
What as a curiosity, I don't know the figures on it, because I'd be curious to see one athlete going into a program like this. Is there, let's say, because I think a few of them go in as nearly a 2 year is kind of the allocation normally as to what we see. Per year is a cost factor. Does the NBA run a cost on what each player kind of costs them going through an academy like this?
I'm sure they do. I don't physically have those numbers to hand, so I can say, but there would be a cost factor to it. But ultimately, if they make the NBA, certainly from the different regional markets, they're going to be an attractive. They'll create an attractive following in their own country.
Yeah. So I suppose.
But that said, it's also about creating those opportunities, right, as well. So that's like where those opportunities don't exist. It's about growing the game globally as well. So there's obviously always a cost effect on it, which comes back to business plan. But at the end of the day, it's creating some opportunities for guys that just wouldn't get that opportunity otherwise.
Yeah. In talking a little about leadership, you've touched on leadership and culture. How important do you think the mixed science, culture, leadership are to developing success? And is there key pillars that you have when you go into a program to say, this has worked previously, this is something that I think would work fantastically in this program as well?
I guess the whole idea of leadership, culture, values, behaviours, that's central to a successful team. And I think the more experienced you become, the more you realise the impact that can have on performance. You can be running some of the best performance programs, sports science programs, monitoring processes, weights programs, running programs in the world. But if you've got a pretty bad culture or poor culture, or things just don't align from top to bottom, there's gaps and there's holes. And I guess everybody's got their own leadership philosophy and approach. I've certainly got mine, and it's still evolving and developing. But I think, and I mentioned this a couple of times, it comes back to people management and relationships. How can you build relationships? Like everything we do in sport falls back to relationships and people and being able to connect and communicate. And I guess that's one of the biggest challenges I've had since coming here. I've been here nearly a year, been working from home since arriving. I've only been in the office maybe 6 times since I've been here. And I only met the academy, or a couple of the academy staff last month after 10 months of being in the role. So I think what this sort of last 18 months has really done to us, certainly myself in this, particularly for this role, is it's redefined what building relationships means, what connecting to people means. It's challenged how I communicate. It's challenged how I demonstrate who I am. It's challenged how I show up. It's challenged what my actual approach and philosophy is. And that whole working remote, I'm dealing with people that I can't speak Spanish and I can't speak French. So I've had to challenge myself to think about how I can get a message through to some of the staff who have broken English. And so how I build those relationships and what I'm trying to do and implement, as I say, still comes back to relationships, still comes back to people, but how can I reinvent myself to think about how I do those things? And I guess at its purest form, and it's about trying to create a program of followership. You're trying to empower people and empower staff to deliver programs which you come up with and develop with obviously others. Empower them to deliver those, but at the same time provide some level of sort of direction to deliver as well. So a lot of it's around education, upskilling, collaboration, leveraging off network of practitioners to learn from each other. So all those things sort of mold you. And I'd say that's changing on a weekly basis because the goalpost moves so fast. When you're dealing, I work on different time zones on a daily basis. Sometimes I can be on the phone from 8 in the morning through to 9 in the evening, non-stop, because you work on all those different time zones. So it's probably been more of a reflection piece as opposed to my philosophy's evolved to a point where this is my philosophy and this is how I operate. It's actually just keeps evolving.
Yeah, with a question coming through, how have you gone, obviously moving away from the day-to-day contact with athletes and personnel to then obviously overseeing a program? Is there any part of, I suppose, your old roles that you miss?
Yes and no. I mean, being with people is great, right? So being in those four walls of a club or an environment with people you enjoy spending time with is awesome. You get to go and have a beer with them at the end of the day or stuff like that. So yeah, certainly I miss bits and pieces. But I wouldn't say at the moment I particularly miss huge parts of it. I mean, this is just another experience that I'm getting under my belt right now and developing my skill set and some of my approaches towards communication and influence and trying to operate programs in different regions. So that said, when I was able to go to Mexico last month, spend time with them there, and our Mba Academy came over for a training camp, and I thoroughly enjoyed being on the deck again, involved in recovery sessions and being live on the court with the players. I mean, I've barely got any idea what's going on in the court, but so yeah, I think it's more about missing being around the people and being around the environment than the actual detail of anything else, because I'm doing a lot of the detail anyway, just in a different way.
A question coming through here is, having now seen the scale and resources of the NBA and some of their processes, would you have done anything differently in your previous roles within either football or soccer, Bulldogs or the Suns?
I don't think so. I think you always work to your means. Our programs at Bulldogs and somewhat the Suns, we're driven from it was a really cost-effective way of having a big impact on performance and decision-making. And all right, we had a lot of people that would be claimed as sports scientists, so to speak. Some were in the background, some were at the coalface, some had FaceTime with athletes, some didn't. But it was cost-effective and it provided a competitive advantage. This program's different and doesn't necessarily require all of that. And the program at the Suns was different to the Bulldogs in the fact that it didn't require all of that and the money that exchanged between the two organizations. And likewise at Liverpool and England. I mean, what you're trying to do is you're trying to unpack performance and what the needs of the department and the organization are. And then you try and plug that thereafter and fill that gap. So knowing what I know now wouldn't potentially change too much in terms of the support element, if that's what the question was leaning towards. Yeah. Hope I answered it.
No, that's good. A question that's come through, and I don't know for you in regards to it. Essentially, they're asking some of the differences, and are the players in Australia attending or a part of the Centre of Excellence program in Australia, as well as the Mba Academy here?
Yeah, so I think obviously I mentioned Marty before, which I think Simon can speak better than I, but the academy program that we operate and to coordinate and push aligns with the COE program with Basketball Australia, and that sits within the AIS. So essentially, they're very tightly run and closely run, those two programs. And so a lot of the processes, a lot of the coaches, a lot of the terminology, a lot of the language is consistent between the two. And the players train together, compete with each other in the same walls, dine together. So yeah, there's a lot of alignment between those two programs.
Perfect. And another question that's come through, or a couple going, how much time a week do you do on your research outside of your daily role?
Well, there's a bit involved. There's a bit of both, really. There's a bit involved in the day-to-day, and then there's a existing stuff which I've had from the Suns and even from the Bulldogs, which I still have running now. So they're at a point now where the students drive those, or ex-students now, and drive that. But essentially, research is involved in the day-to-day, whether that's reading research and applying new philosophies or principles of practice, or dealing with your actual information that you collect on a daily basis. I mean, research doesn't need to be research that's published. Research can be stuff that you're collecting on a daily basis. And I think that's often sort of misunderstood in sport, is that just because you don't publish a paper doesn't mean that you're doing research. A lot of the research, people are doing research internally on a daily basis. You go and do a training session tomorrow on the field or on the court, and you collect information on that session. That's essentially a research, because at some point you're going to collect that information. You're going to put it into some platform. You're going to filter it, clean it up, put it into a report, and then interpret it and put it to people who should see that information. And so that's research. Research is creating new knowledge. And I often follow a platform of, well, it's a model called DIKW, Data, Information, Knowledge and Wisdom. And it basically follows that pathway, that you collect data, and that's just raw information. That becomes information when you've actually filtered it. That becomes knowledge after you've actually cleaned it, analyzed it, interpreted it. And then the wisdom part is then actually translating it and putting it into practice. And so a lot of people and a lot of places are doing that anyway. And that's what we do on a daily basis.
If someone's collecting that data and transitioning, obviously there's athletes to college or professional levels, externally from the Mba Academy, the teams and college teams and professional teams, are they interested in this data and to essentially help them select and push those players to those clubs?
Sorry, I'm just make sure I understand your question. So your question is, are the clubs and franchise interested in the information we're collecting?
Yeah. So the data, so on a certain players like Josh Giddey going to the NBA draft, are clubs working with you guys in regards to something that might be how he's progressed with his vertical leap and those types of avenues and training practices that he's had? Does that play a big part in helping them get to their next spot?
Yeah, I mean, franchises and colleges will be scouting these guys all the time, and there's staff responsible for communicating with coaches, with colleges, with franchises, with scouts, to make sure that these players have exposure. And then part and parcel of that then is that seamless communication and transition. So I mentioned transition before, and that's part and parcel of it. Making sure there's communication between those different, I guess, chapters of that athlete's career and pathway.
Yeah, no, awesome. Well, guys, if there's any more questions, I do have one last one that's come in as well. Have you ever been starstruck by an A-list sports star, or have you been strictly professional and never turned into a fan?
Probably one of my days at Liverpool when Kenny Dalglish took over as caretaker manager, and he came to training, and then he decided to do the team talk on my second game I was there. So that was a pretty special moment because it's Kenny Dalglish. But other than that, though, I'll be honest, when I moved to the AFL, I had no idea who anybody was, and I think that probably actually boded quite well for me, because I was able to have conversation and communicate with people without any sort of preface, basically, on who they were, what they'd done, or anything. As silly as that sounds or seems. So yeah. So no, I'm not someone who really is starstruck in that way.
No, mate. Well, look, for everything today, a massive thank you, and I really appreciate taking the time out. I think it's coming into dinner time where you are at the moment in New York. So mate, I really appreciate taking the time over the last hour to share with us your experiences and your philosophies within the sports science realm, and obviously across different codes. So on behalf of all the partners, a massive thank you for your time today, mate.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks DK Sports as well for the opportunity to talk and reflect. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Beautiful, mate. Well, guys, on again, a massive thank you to John. But as we tick through, we have our next session, I think starting in about half an hour, that the links have been sent out. If you do have any issues, feel free to let us know. But again, a massive thank you to John, and thank you for joining us again for our big webinar session today.